Imagine falling in love with someone you've never met, someone who exists only in a haunting portrait and the stories others tell. A detective is assigned to solve a brutal murder, but as he dives deeper into the case, he becomes obsessed with the victim. The deeper he digs, the more he's drawn into a web of deception, jealousy, and deadly secrets. Everyone who knew her had a different version of her. Was she a heartless manipulator, an innocent victim, or something else entirely? The case should be straightforward, but nothing is as it seems. And when you think you have the answers, a shocking twist changes everything. Hello to all the classic people. I'm glad you're back. I want to welcome any new visitors and let you know that there will be spoilers ahead. Today on Classic Movie Review, we are taking on film noir Laura 1944. As always, you can subscribe to the show on YouTube by using @ClassicMovieRev or for audio only on Apple Podcasts by searching for Classic Movie Review. This is a very unusual film noir. The story follows a detective as he falls in love with a murdered woman. Director Otto Preminger added some odd homoerotic tension to the story. The film is rated a good 7.9 on IMDb.com. On RottenTomatoes.com, the film has what I believe is a more accurate rating with 100% on the tomato meter and a 90% audience score. Great film critic Roger Ebert gave this movie 4 stars. He basically said the film has a lot of holes, but it's so good it doesn't matter. Cranky old New York Times film critic Bosley Crothers said in part in an October 12, 1944 review, quote, "When a murder mystery possessing as much sustained suspense, good acting, and caustically brittle dialogue as Laura comes along, it might seem a little like carping to suggest that it could have been even better. As the story of a strangely fascinating female who insinuates herself into the lives of 3 very worldly gents, much depends, of course, upon the lady herself," unquote. Well, sounds interesting, so let's jump right into the actors. Actors. Dana Andrews was cast in the role of Detective Lieutenant Mark McPherson, who falls in love with a dead woman. It's interesting to note that in this film noir, the investigation is undertaken by a police officer and not a shamus. Andrews was first covered in the war film In Harm's Way 1965. There's a link below. I've always been a big fan of Dana Andrews, and he is from Collins, Mississippi, which is 15 miles north of my ancestral homeland and the same place that Parker Posey comes from. I don't know what's in the water up there. Vincent Price played the role of Shelby Carpenter, a southern huckster who was engaged to the murdered woman. Price was first covered in The Last Man on Earth 1964. There's a link below. I grew up watching Vincent Price in horror movies, but he's now better known as the voice at the end of the song Thriller. Gene Tierney played the role of top advertising executive Laura Hunt. Tierney was born in New York in 1920.
I'm walking here! I'm walking here!
She had a wealthy family, which resulted in her having a first-rate education, including a finishing school in Switzerland. Tierney returned to the U.S. and was performing on Broadway by 1938. Her very first role consisted of carrying a bucket of water on stage, prompting a critic to state, quote, "Miss Tierney is without a doubt the most beautiful water carrier I have ever seen," unquote. In 1940, Darrell F. Zanuck saw Tierney in a play, and she was signed to a contract with 20th Century Fox. Tierney's first release film was the outlaw western The Return of Frank James, 1940, followed by Hudson Bay, 1941. She starred in The Shanghai Gesture, 1941, which I consider to be one of her best performances. There's a link below. Other films include Sundown, 1941, Tobacco Road, 1941, and Bellstar, 1941, a western loosely based on a female outlaw that was associated with the James Younger Gang. She was in comedy Ring on Her Finger, 1942, directed by Otto Preminger. She was in Laura, 1944, and it is largely considered to be one of Tierney's best films. Tierney received an Oscar nomination for Leave Her to Heaven, 1945. I had a nice talk about this movie with Russell Guest from Retro Movie Roundtable. There's a link below. In one of my favorite films, The Razor's Edge 1946, she plays the spoiled brat rich girl Isabel Bradley to a T. There's a link below. Clifton Webb co-starred with her in this film as well. Tierney was wonderful in The Ghost and Mrs. Muir 1947. I'm an old grizzly, and this movie makes me misty. Big roles such as Night in the City 1950, The Mating Season 1951, Close to My Heart 1951, Personal Affair 1953, and The Left Hand of God 1955 continued for Tierney through the mid-50s. A failed marriage, a disabled child, and some disastrous love affairs led to depression and a hiatus from film. Tierney returned for Advise and Consent in 1962, and she was as great as ever. And if you haven't seen Advise and Consent, I highly recommend it. I haven't reviewed it yet, but it's definitely on the list. However, by the time of Advise and Consent, the demand was gone. Her final feature film was The Pleasure Seekers 1964. Tierney died in 1991, shortly before her 71st birthday. Clifton Webb played the role of Waldo Lydecker, mentor to Laura, and snotty columnist and radio host. Born in 1899, Webb was trained as a youth to act and dance. He left school at 13 to study music and painting. At the age of 19, Webb was a professional ballroom dancer. By his mid-20s, he was on Broadway, on the London stage, and in silent movies. It took Webb a while to be in talkies because he refused to audition. His first sound film was indeed today's film, Laura 1944. He appeared again with Gene Tierney in The Razor's Edge 1946, and like I said, there's a link below. Webb's portrayal of Elliot Templeton was masterful. However, he may have been playing a character that was very close to his type. Staying close to type, he was in a series of Mr. Belvedere movies. A couple of his more interesting roles include Cheaper by the Dozen 1950 with Myrna Loy and Mr. Scoutmaster 1953. Webb lived with his mother until she died at the age of 91. He died 6 years later in 1966 at the age of 76. Dame Judith Anderson played socialite and sugar mama Anne Treadwell. Anderson was born in Australia in 1897. She started acting there before moving to New York in 1918. She did well in America and was a top Broadway actress from the 1930s through the 1950s. Anderson had a strong bearing in her roles. With her strong nose, prominent chin mold, and stern bearing, she seemed the kind of person that you would say yes ma'am to. She was made a Dame of the British Empire in 1960. Anderson's first movie was the early Noir pre-code film Blood Money 1933. There's a link below. She won a Best Supporting Actress Oscar for the Alfred Hitchcock-directed Rebecca 1940. A while back, I had a conversation with the author of Hitchcock's Blondes, Lawrence Lemire. There's a link below if you're interested. One of the better films Anderson was in was The Great Murder Mystery and Then There Were None 1945. Anderson made her mark on film noir with The Red House 1947, but I don't think it's that great a film. The Strange Loves of Martha Ivers 1946, and there is a link below. Laura 1944, and Why Bother to Knock 1961. Anderson showed her range with westerns, Pursued 1947, and The Furies 1950, drama with Cat on a Hot Tin Roof 1958, and the biblical epic The Ten Commandments 1956. My personal favorite of her films is A Man Called Horse 1970, where she played Buffalo Cowhead in another film version of Sutter's Run, which was also covered in The Naked Prey 1965. There are links below for both. After almost a decade and a half away from film, Anderson appeared in Star Trek III, The Search for Spock 1984. This film could arguably be the worst of the original series movies. Anderson played Vulcan High Priestess T'Lar. She is one of only 11 people born in the 19th century to appear in the Star Trek the original series franchise. She oddly decided to appear in a television soap opera after such an amazing career. Anderson appeared in 66 episodes of Santa Barbara from 1984 to 1987. This great talent passed away in 1992. Story. This movie begins by showing the portrait of Laura, Gene Tierney, hung over a fireplace as the credits roll. When the credits end, the voice of Waldo Lydecker, Clifton Webb, reading well-written prose about the death of Laura is heard. Waldo says he was the only person who knew her, and he was just about to write her story when a New York City police detective Mark McPherson, Dana Andrews, is shown waiting in the living room of the upscale apartment. The detective looks at a large grandfather clock, and the narrator says there is only one other, and it's in Laura's apartment. Waldo calls McPherson into the bathroom where he is lounging in the tub while he types on his typewriter. Waldo moves the typewriter and exposes himself to McPherson. When Waldo stands up, McPherson gives him a much debated look. We won't find the answer here. Waldo is impressed when he finds out that McPherson is a hero and captured a killer. McPherson asks about a column Waldo wrote that said a person was murdered by a shotgun blast of buckshot the same manner Laura was killed. When McPherson gets ready to leave, Waldo wants to tag along. Waldo says murder is his favorite crime. McPherson asks if he was in love with Laura. Waldo doesn't really answer. The pair travel to a very nice apartment and meet Laura's very rich socialite aunt, Anne Treadwell, Judith Anderson.
Remember when Laura bought these glasses? She loved them.
Eventually, McPherson asks Anne how she feels about Laura's fiancé, Shelby Carpenter, Vincent Price. He then asks if Anne is in love with Carpenter. Anne has been giving Carpenter money and spending a lot of social time with him. Waldo makes wisecracks the entire time. Shelby comes in and makes excuses for being at Anne's apartment. Waldo says Laura was not definitive about marrying Shelby. Waldo, Shelby, and McPherson go to Laura's apartment to get a key to Laura's cabin. McPherson breaks Shelby's alibi and finds out that he planted a key to the cabin in Laura's drawer. Shelby and Waldo almost get into a fight. That night, Waldo and McPherson eat out at an Italian restaurant. Like all good film noirs, Waldo takes the tale back 5 years to his first meeting with the naive young Laura.
Always quick to seize upon anything that would improve her mind or her appearance. Laura had innate breeding.
He sternly rebuffs her. Later, Waldo finds Laura at her office and apologizes. He then starts mentoring her and helping her meet the right people to make her a star in the advertising field. Don Draper?
I don't think about you at all.
Waldo picks her hairstyle and the clothes she wore. They eat out every night except Tuesday and Friday when they cook at home. After a time, Laura begins canceling her regular visits with Waldo. Waldo stalks her house and found out that the man she was seeing was Jacoby, the artist who had drawn the portrait. Waldo destroys him in his column and every other man Laura becomes interested in. One night at a party, Laura meets Shelby, who is from Kentucky. His redneck charm wins over Laura.
You're Laura Hunt, aren't you?
Yes.
I'm Shelby Carpenter. Want to dance?
I'm not alone.
Oh, you poor girl. I bet he still does the polka.
Yes, Betsy Ross taught it to me.
Shelby admits he has no money, so Laura gives him a job at the advertising agency. One of the models that Shelby uses is Diane Redfern. As Laura and Shelby become closer, Waldo becomes more jealous. Waldo has Shelby investigated and tries to turn Laura against him. He tells Laura that Shelby is also seeing Diane Redfern. Waldo finally shows Laura a cigarette case that she had given Shelby, which was later pawned by Diane Redfern. When he breaks her down, Waldo says he is doing all of this for her. Waldo and Laura go to Anne's apartment and find Shelby dining with Anne. Laura slaps the cigarette case down and storms out. Waldo says that on the Friday of the murder, Laura had lunch with Diane Redfern. Laura called Waldo and said she was going to the country to sort things out. Back in the current time, McPherson begins hanging around Laura's house, reading her letters, her diaries, and drinking her booze. McPherson calls the liquor supplier and asks if Laura ever bought Black Pony Scotch. The housekeeper, Bessie Clare, Dorothy Adams, comes in for her interview and gives McPherson the business for messing with Laura's stuff. Bessie says Laura was a real fine lady. He asks her about the Black Pony Scotch. Bessie says she found the full bottle on Saturday before the police came, and the bottle had not been there when Bessie left on Friday. Bessie also washes the glasses. Around this time, Shelby, Waldo, and Anne show up, and he offers them a drink of the scotch. Shelby refuses the drink, saying he is not a day drinker. Anne and Waldo begin to talk about the estate, and Waldo tries to reclaim a vase, the matching clock, and a fire screen. McPherson won't let Waldo take anything, and he sends the three away mad. That night, McPherson goes back to Laura's apartment. He continues to rifle through her stuff, stare at her pictures, and search her bedroom. Waldo shows up and starts giving McPherson grief for invading Laura's stuff. Waldo also reveals that McPherson has put in a bid for the portrait of Laura. Waldo says McPherson may have fallen in love with a corpse.
Get going.
You better watch out, McPherson, or you'll end up in a psychiatric ward. I don't think I've ever had a patient who fell in love with a corpse.
McPherson falls asleep under the portrait of Laura. The door opens and in walks a very much alive Laura, who demands to know why the man is in her house. He tells her about the murdered girl in her apartment. When Laura changes out of her wet clothes, she finds one of Diane Redfern's dresses in her closet. McPherson interrogates Laura about her whereabouts and alibis. McPherson finds out that Shelby has a key to her apartment. He also says the murdered woman was wearing Laura's nightgown and slippers. McPherson orders Laura not to leave the house or call anyone. As soon as McPherson is out, Laura calls Shelby. They meet and then split up. McPherson has brought in another officer. McPherson follows Shelby and the other officer follows Laura. Shelby goes to Laura's cabin and takes the shotgun off the mantle. McPherson catches him in the act. McPherson tells Shelby that he is in trouble because he knows who the murdered woman is. Shelby says he took Laura's key from the office and took Diane to the house. After 3 hours, the doorbell rang and he asked Diane to answer the door. Shelby heard the shot and then ran to Diane and never saw the shooter. Shelby says he was not sure if Laura did it and he was only trying to keep Laura's name clean. McPherson also finds out that Laura lied about her radio at the cabin not working. In the morning, McPherson comes to see Laura with a bag of breakfast to be cooked. Bessie comes in and freaks out when she sees Laura. They then decide that Bessie should cook for the two of them. Shelby shows up. McPherson starts in on Shelby. When he sees Laura, he is visibly shocked and then faints. McPherson decides not to arrest anyone, and Waldo plans a party for Laura. At the party, Ann starts giving Shelby grief and tries to get him back. Shelby is riding high as he thinks Laura needs him. Oddly, McPherson is at the party. Shelby reveals that he went to the cabin to get the shotgun/murder weapon to protect Laura.
I was groping for some way to keep Laura's name out of it.
Laura goes to the bedroom and talks with Ann. Ann says Shelby is right for her and McPherson is right for Laura. McPherson gets a phone call and he announces that he will bring the killer in that day.
Don't worry. I told you I'd bring in the killer today. Yeah, I was just going to make the arrest when you called. No, I can't tell you now. I'm not alone. You'll see when I come in.
McPherson arrests Laura for the murder. Waldo says he will use his column and his other resources to defend Laura. Shelby is dumbly indignant. McPherson says he wished Shelby had opened the door and gotten shot. Shelby grabs McPherson, who returns a punch to Shelby's midsection, sending him to the ground, where Ann is ready to pick him up. McPherson asks Laura about the radio, and she says she hired a handyman to fix it when she left the country. McPherson is more concerned with Shelby and Laura's engagement being back on again. Under interrogation, Laura says she doesn't love Shelby. McPherson lets her go, saying that she was never arrested and that he just needed to be sure about her. McPherson goes to Waldo's apartment and breaks in. He looks at Waldo's clock and finds out it has a hidden compartment. Back at Laura's house, Waldo is working on smearing McPherson's reputation. Waldo says he and Laura will be back together soon. McPherson goes back to Laura's apartment. Laura sends Waldo away, and Waldo says he will be discussing Great Lovers on his show in 15 minutes. McPherson goes to the clock and finds the murder weapon in the secret compartment. McPherson tells Laura that Waldo was the killer and hid the gun after Shelby fled the apartment. Waldo's hiding in the hallway, the same way he did the night he murdered Diane. When McPherson leaves to arrest Waldo, Waldo comes back in the apartment to kill Laura, saying that if he can't have her, no one will. At the stoop of the building, McPherson finds out from the police sergeant that Waldo never left the building. The police bust in as Waldo attempts to shoot Laura. One of the police sergeants guns Waldo down. Waldo's last words are, "Goodbye, Laura. Goodbye, my love." Conclusion. Few films capture the essence of classic Hollywood film noir glamour and intrigue as effortlessly as Laura 1944. Otto Preminger's direction, coupled with cinematography of Joseph Lachelle, changed what could have been a standard murder mystery into something far more enigmatic and seductive. This film operates on many levels, not just as a whodunit. It's a think piece with obsession, perception, and the sham nature of identity. At its heart, Laura is about the way people construct their own version of reality, particularly when it comes to love and desire. Each of the key players, Waldo Lydecker, Mark McPherson, and Shelby Carpenter, view Laura Hunt through a different lens, shaping her into an idealized version rather than seeing her as she truly is. Even the audience is drawn into the web of illusion as we first come to know Laura through a portrait and the memories of those who claim to have known her best. When she unexpectedly steps back into the story, it is as if she has emerged from a dream, challenging everything we thought we understood about her. Gene Tierney's performance as Laura was amazing, perfectly capturing the character's allure. Dana Andrews, as a jaded detective who finds himself falling for a woman he believes to be dead, gives a performance that is understated yet deeply compelling. And then there's Clifton Webb as Waldo Lydecker, whose acerbic wit and possessive devotion to Laura makes him one of film noir's most fascinating villains. His performance alone elevated this film, turning it into something vastly superior to a typical crime story. This film's themes of longing and unobtainability resonate across generations, making it feel just as relevant and captivating today as it did in 1944. Unlike many film noirs, which plunge their characters into inescapable doom, Laura offers a sense of redemption, albeit one that comes at a cost. It leaves us with the lingering question of whether anyone, even Laura herself, truly knows who she is beneath the projections of those around her. Mrs. Classic Movie Review usually watches all of the movies with me. When I was reading New York Times reviews from 1944 and more recent Robert Ebert reviews, she casually stood up at the end and said, "You know, that movie's just a remake of Phantom of the Opera." Damn, missed that. You can go to classicmovierev.com to read notes, bios, and other random movie thoughts. World famous short summary: don't judge McPherson for falling in love with a picture. You've fallen in love with a character from a movie. Beware the Moors. All right, in a couple seconds, some boxes are going to come up here. One is a film noir movie I recommend, and the other is a film noir playlist for you to check out.